attending an event like this has definitely challenged my own resilience, but also, obviously, I've been more than ever grateful for my tools. And there's been so many amazing speakers already talking about stress, talking about resilience. I'm not a doctor. I come from a completely different background. I spent my life in advertising, 25 years, in corporate life, consulting. I became partner in my first agency in my early 20s, and I was with 3 15-year-old male partners, older male partners. And I think what I've learned and how my career evolved was really pushing through. The sky's the limit as long as you perform. And I became really, really excellent at that. Pushing through whatever challenge, whatever new budget or new client was to be won, project to be completed, it was really about pushing through. And at some point, and I think this is where a lot of us are actually, at some point I found myself in a situation. I didn't go into burnout, but I started developing migraines. I had constant headaches. I had so much tension in my neck and my shoulders. I started developing allergies. And throughout the winter season, I would be constantly with half a cough, half a cold, flu. Obviously no time to be sick, but I would still, actually, I found myself in this situation where I was not at all feeling well. I was not sick, but I was definitely not at my best either. And that actually started my curiosity to understand, okay, what can I do to balance this a bit more? I was traveling a lot with a lot of international clients. I was in New York, I tried cryotherapy, and I was blown away by 3 minutes in this cold air, basically, and how it made me feel. And that kind of sparked my curiosity into the world of biohacking and longevity. I started, wherever I would go when I was traveling, I would find a local biohacking longevity center and I will try out these therapies. And what was interesting was that after a while, I actually ended up buying a machine in Denmark because nobody else did, and that became the start of 130 Labs. And what was interesting, after 6 months doing cryotherapy, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, I realized, okay, I haven't had any headaches. I haven't had any migraines. My allergy that spring didn't come. And I realized that I've really gone through a transition with my health very positively because of this therapy. I fortunately has always been very active, so I have a good foundation. I eat quite well. I always move a lot. But for me, it was so interesting to see that this one biohack could help me so much. And I think also touching upon what others before me today, Dr. Tamsin, Melissa has said, one thing is then optimizing your physical health. And for me, I really became great at that. And then life happens, and I got divorced. My closest, dearest friend, a sister to me, 3 months later, after my divorce was completed, she got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer in the age of 43, with a small daughter, my goddaughter, and went through a completely terrible 3 years of battling that. And then at the same time, I founded 130 Labs. My agency I had quite a few employees and quite a lot of revenue to make every month, and COVID came. Another stress factor I think we all realized, especially as self-employed. And all of a sudden, I found myself in a situation where I realized, okay, even though I've optimized my physical health and feeling much better there, all of a sudden, all this uncertainty, all this emotional stress, all these factors that I couldn't control, they were really impacting me, and they started impacting, again, also my physical health. So it became really my way into, and why I'm so passionate to talk about resilience is because life happens. We live in a world that is full of stress, and it's not going to change. We cannot change that we as human beings will live in stress constantly. What we can change is how we choose to react, respond, and how we choose to be in that stress. How can we build that resilience? And that's really, for me, what resilience is all about. See if I can. But just taking a step back, for sure, stress and burnout is a societal problem. It's really something that, if you look at the numbers, it costs our society billions every year. If you ask employees, most of them will say they feel stressed now, or have been, or are actually chronically stressed in their work situation. Women, twice as likely as men, for obvious, or maybe not obvious reasons at all, but for many reasons, and Melissa just touched upon them in her talk before. So yes, stress is a true issue. Burnout is an issue. But what do we do? Because we are not going to remove that stress. And I think that's also why it's so important to understand that stress is not just stress. And I think we, for years now, have been in a situation where stress has been kind of like the bad guy in all of this. But there's also positive stress, and understanding the different types of stress, I believe, very much will help you also be more resilient and go through that. Because it's not about eliminating stress from our lives, it's actually about finding balance. A little bit of stress is good for us. It can be a huge driver, it can fuel evolution, it can fuel your personal development. But too much stress, obviously, is where it gets not very healthy, and especially if we go into chronic long-term stress, as a lot of people have talked about already, this is really where we fuel disease, where we create chronic inflammation, which we know is a big factor in all lifestyle diseases today. But again, back to understanding these different types of stress. It's physical, yes, but it's also emotional, it's also environmental, and it's mental stress. So understanding, for example, the environmental stress, a lot of toxins constantly. One of the biggest stressors to our body is processed food. I think most people believe that what stresses us is our workload or not having time enough. But again, if we look at all the toxins our system has to deal with, that is actually one of the biggest stress factors today. So stress is many things. Some of them you can control, others you can't. But again, back to my approach to resilience is really choose to take control of what you can and let go of what you can't. When we saw the weather forecast for last week, and a storm was coming and all our outdoor activities were planned, and you have to kind of, okay, but what can we do about it? Let it go. It's not something I can control, so there's no need for me to put a lot of energy into stressing about it. The only thing that makes sense is actually just saying, okay, what is our plan B if that really happens? And that, again, of course, in the moment it feels stressful. It is a super annoying situation. Okay, but you find a solution, you move on. That is stress. That is, if at least in my experience, if you can have that approach, then you can also better release some of these many stress factors that we do have in our life, and then choose to focus on where it is you need to build resilience, where is it you actually need to be strong to go through various things in life. And that also leads me to one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, and this is also said as an employer and knowing our healthcare system. 80% of all sick leaves in Denmark are because of stress. But does it help you to be sent home 3 months in bed if you're not feeling well? And why is it exactly you're not feeling well? It's very rare because of your workload. And still, that's usually what's been kind of diagnosed as the reason for this situation. But in reality, it's always an accumulation of many different things. It's your personal environment, it's your professional, it's societal. We live in a world with terrible wars and presidents we cannot control. And I think there's, just opening your phone and looking at the news, if that's what you do in the morning or in the evening, I mean, that is a stress factor in itself. So adding all these things together in a modern life where we're always on, of course we feel stressed, of course we feel overloaded. So when is it that you can actually take a step back and find balance in that? But also my point is, I think that is really why we see so much burnout now. It has nothing to do with our work. It has nothing to do, most of the time at least, with our workload. It's just a fact of modern society, and that is what we need to learn to navigate. I think it's also important to understand, and I love Dr. Olivia Leslas. She has an amazing talk about this. I hope some of you heard it, but she talks about the ancient survival brain. And I think also understanding that we as human beings are not wired for the life we are living. Our DNA has not evolved with the same speed as our industrial evolution, and that's also why it can be so hard for our nervous system to understand and feel safe and relaxed in a modern world. Even though we rationally know, I'm fine, this is not life-threatening, but all these constant inputs and impacts from social media, always on, the bad news, all the toxins, and then adding on top, obviously, also what you have in your personal life. It can be your own relations that are toxic. It can be issues at work. It can be dealing with a startup and you need to raise more money. Or you building an event like this and you worry about, will enough people come? Will it rain? Will it not rain? All these things. So this is, this is my tired brain losing track. So that is also still in effect. At some point you do need to recover and rest. But yeah, the survival brain we are not wired for all of this. And I think just knowing that is also kind of comforting and in a way that, okay, this is actually not a natural state to be in. So the question is then, okay, what can we then do to find more balance and be more resilient in this world? And again, I think it's also important to say, I talked about physical health, but when we talk about burnout, stress, feeling overwhelmed, it impacts so much more. And I think that's also why we see so many people with anxiety today or depression. Again, it's hard for us to cope, and then our body and mind find its own way. Inflammation drives up a lot of this disease, so if you want to call it that, but conditions at least. And I haven't even mentioned now, where I'm also myself, how hormones then add on top of that, especially for women in transition, midlife, and perimenopause and menopause can be a very interesting added factor to all of that. A recent study from the UK showed that actually 20% of women are considering leaving their jobs due to perimenopause-related stress, which again I feel is interesting, because is it really the work that is the stress, and is it that should be left, or is it maybe more related to other factors in life? So again, rethinking resilience, it's not about avoiding stress, it's not about avoiding change, it's really about building the capacity to stand strong through it. So for me, it's that ability to go through life. It's bouncing back, but it's also really learning the right tools when you are in times of challenge, in times of change, with things you cannot control. And as it has been said, and I'm sorry that I'm repeating some of this, but maybe the good thing is we definitely all agree on these tools. The inner tools are super important. you have to find tools that you can use on an everyday basis, no matter where you are, free of amazing machines. I'm a big fan of biohacking, as most of you know, but it's also just have that capability to breathe when you need it. That is free. You have access to it 24/7. It's a tool you can use when you're traveling, at work, at home. Go out in nature, move. We had before a dance. I went dancing last night. I don't know if it's a good idea for my sleep score, but I think it was an amazing disconnect for me, on top of all the stress of building this event. And that's also, I think, what we really need to remember. It's also finding those ways of joy, of smiling, of moving our bodies so we can release some of all this tension that builds up. And for me, actually, being with friends, being social is one of the biggest and most impactful way that I disconnect. And I know we are all different, but still, I think it's be curious and explore what works for you. And I truly believe, like Melissa also said, great music, dancing, laughing, being with friends, great conversations is the best way to disconnect. Also, when you're running 3 companies and there's tons of things to worry about and a lot of financial issues to deal with, it's a great way. And be curious to find out what works for you, because in my experience, sitting down and meditating and going inward in those situations can actually be the hardest. And I've practiced a lot, trust me, with the best meditation teachers all around the world. And for me, it's still such a difficult tool to master when I need it the most. I can do it when I'm in a good place, but when I'm really under pressure, it's hard. Then the dancing works. Or going out in nature, moving. That is, for me, one of my biggest release and best tools. And again, we're all different, but I have so many people coming and say, oh, but how do you handle all of this? How do you have energy? How do you overcome it? And I think that's really what you need to be curious about. It's finding out what is it that works for you. And maybe you have to look a little bit broader and be a little bit more curious than just going straight for the kind of classical mindfulness tools or whatever it is that you've been taught. And then remember how much your community means in all of this and your relations. I talked before, I mentioned what I've been through with a lot of, if you look at these kind of big life changes or things that happens in life, losing a dear one, going through divorce. I had to close down my agency after 15 years because of a wrong partner. They pretty much check all the big check signs. Sorry again, my tired brain. And still, I found a lot of joy in these moments in time. And I really prioritized traveling a lot, being with my friends, doing what I knew would fuel me and feed me with positive emotions, with joy, so I could then also be in all the things that were not necessarily that great or easy to do. And another thing that was, and where I actually really believe that the biohacking tools come into place, they are amazing, but they can also really be a stepping stone when you lack sleep, when you lack energy, when you lack what it takes to actually do some of these things we know are good for us. I found that 3 minutes in that cryo chamber or the light therapy or whatever it is you do was really kind of lifting me and giving me then a better night's rest. So I would have more energy the next day to actually do what I felt was necessary. And that is also one of my key takeaways here is, again, find out what is a good starting point for you? What is it that actually helps you build that, give you that extra energy so you can do the things that will make you more resilient? I will jump to that, and then I will just also mention one thing when we talk about this. And again, I feel like I'm a little bit repetitive of the previous speakers, but again, as a woman, know your cycle. And I will say, again, also coming from a business perspective, I cannot plan an event like this around my cycle. I cannot plan a lot of other things I do. I need to perform when I need to perform. But what I can is I can be more gentle with myself, knowing that if I don't feel on top, if I feel more vulnerable, if I feel more tired, whatever it is, I actually, because I know my cycle, because I understand where I am, I can have a little bit more care for myself. And I think that is, as a woman, also very, very important. Again, when we cannot control when we are on, when we have to perform, but at least we can have that insight and then support ourselves through it. And then maybe do a little bit more of, whether it's the biohacking tools or it's your other mindfulness tool, your inner tools, that I think is really important to understand. And again, adding hormonal changes on top and perimenopause is definitely just fueling this whole situation quite a lot. So, final note. Again, I think understanding stress is not necessarily bad. Stress is many things. Try and feel and understand, feel within yourself, what is it that truly are triggering you? What is the true stress factor if you feel that in your life? And then try and be mindful of it before it actually comes to a point where you end up in a burnout situation. I think we really need to stop accepting that feeling unwell is normal. We have to understand that if our body sends the signals, if we have constant headaches, if we have migraines, if we have back pain, if we have bad sleep, there's usually a reason, and we should listen to that and we should work around it. So again, we cannot remove stress, but we can learn to live with it, and we can learn to also, I think, prioritize on what's most important and what is actually the true source, both for why we are feeling unwell, but also where we can find healing. So resilience to me, it's not the absence of stress, it's actually the ability to navigate it. And I hope I gave you a little bit of inspiration for that. Thank you so much for listening.